Great. So maybe I'll start this one for Phillip. Going beyond bridges for a moment. So if bridges, intents, solvers, if those are the plumbing of our new cross-chain world, then what's the actual house? Cross-chain is a means to an end, right? What does the world look like where cross-chain has been solved? What can we do that we couldn't do before?
I think it's all about moving the traditional financial system on new rails, right? And we're trying to do that in a decentralized fashion so that we can have a more permissionless system with greater standardization and like building all of this in a more efficient way. I think interoperability or cross-chain functionalities, those are the things that we just need to make that happen because like normal databases, blockchains have to scale horizontally. And that's just why multi-chain is so important. We need to find different approaches. If you look at the database space or just look at Facebook or Google, they have huge data centers. That means they need thousands or millions of databases to make that happen. And the blockchain space has to scale in some similar fashion. And interoperability just means that it all feels like one chain. Or in the best case, from a user perspective, no chain at all. Nothing changes. It's just seamless UX.
Any other perspectives? What's possible once we solve this?
Well, I mean, shouldn't we be aiming at users not even knowing that they're using a chain? I mean, at the end of the day, I think the goal is that, you know, like what Robinhood showed the other day, you just log in an app, you trade, you do whatever you want. You don't care about, you know, where the settlement happens, where your assets are. Just like, you know, when you go to an ATM and you withdraw cash, you don't care how the banks settle in between. Ideally, you don't pay high fees and that's it. And I think that's when you have to get to in the crypto space. If I have to understand, oh, like my assets are on this chain and I have to move it through this other bridge to this other chain, these are so many extra steps that just prohibit new users, non-DeFi users, to actually enter the space. And I think there's been a lot of steps taken in that direction, but ultimately I think it'll be a purely application-driven or wallet distribution channel-driven ecosystem where wallets own the users and people don't care what chain they're on actually.
And I think the second order effect of this is going to be that lowering the barrier of entry for the chains will lead to proliferation of the number of chains. So things that previously could not have been their own chain, like applications, they would have to pick where they deploy, like become a part of some big chain, and then be inherently limited by the limitations of this environment. Now this goes away, and every app can be upgraded to an app chain, have full control over the block space, over the execution environment, like also privacy of the space, and we will see thousands of app chains flourishing.
I think three of them really added like very interesting points. I see both scenarios playing out where there could be a proliferation of application-specific chains that really have the utility for having self-sovereignty or control over block space. But on the other hand, the next billion users are going to get onboarded to crypto. They're probably not going to interact with any chain. They will be interacting with a protocol that is lying on Ethereum, but settling somewhere on, say, ZKsync or Arbitrum, and they just don't really see any of those things while interacting with crypto all along in the back end. So I see both scenarios playing out. How does the world look like? I think only time will tell.
So this is a refrain that we've been hearing for years, that solving cross-chain is going to create this seamless experience for users in a way that's similar to abstraction. So people don't know what chain they're on. But I've heard even Vitalik before point out some of the dangers of abstraction, that chains won't be able to compete against each other for users based on merits like privacy, decentralization, because the user is no longer making a selection. Are you concerned about any of this?
I think it's not about abstraction, it's about standardization. It's not like, if you think about it, the websites on the internet are all different and have different properties. You might trust one shop, but you don't trust the other shop. You would not use your credit card there. But you have the same interface of addressing them. You have the same browser, same URL, same link that takes you there. A different example is banks. Like, are banks all abstracted away by payment solutions? No, they don't. You decide where you're having your banking relationship with whom, and your merchants decide where they bank with, and like it might be different criteria for retail, for merchants, etc. But you as a merchant, you know what your bank is. When you pay with a credit card, you don't care where the bank of the merchant is. This is the kind of a world we're building. So users will still decide, applications will still decide, but the connectivity will become much more seamless.
Yeah, I agree. Application developers are making the choices today, and they will make these choices in the future based on the security level and privacy levels their application needs, right? And then these applications can position themselves as more or less secure, faster and cheaper. Same thing all over again, just different rails.
So it's going to mostly be agents and developers that are choosing between chains rather than this kind of strange situation where we have cults around back-end software because they're reaching out to retail in order to compete. So that sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to talk about fragmentation. Liquidity minimalism versus liquidity maximalism. I guess, do you see a future where we have fewer, deeper liquidity hubs or where there's deeper fragmentation? And how do you see us overcoming that fragmentation?
I have a strong opinion about that. I think, like in most financial markets, you're gonna have a very few amount of players that's gonna oligopolize like that market. I believe. So right now, just talking from a Li.Fi perspective, we spent the last 4 years aggregating all kinds of bridging and exchange solutions, right? And the future is obviously an intense system. It's just an order flow marketplace where you get orders and you auctionize them across third-party solvers, individual systems that can solve for whatever they want to or not, right? But just because they're intense systems today doesn't mean that you don't need aggregation anymore. And the reason for that is that running a server profitably is so hard. And so you find them concentrated where demand is highest. But what about the other 50 chains? Right? So right now we have to run a hybrid model of aggregation and auctioning. But ultimately what we can already see in existing intense systems, may it be cross-chain like Across, or may it be a same chain like UniX or OneInfusion, CowSwap, it's just 2-3 solvers that take all the market share. The most sophisticated market makers have released their own solver systems. They have all the access to liquidity, and liquidity depth is a competitive advantage in solving. And there we are. You know, it's like the biggest bags win.
Solverify.
I mean, I think it doesn't only apply to solvers, but to chains as well. I mean, if you look at the chain ecosystem right now in DeFi Llama, you can see liquidity concentrated on a few of them. And, you know, it's always worth observing, like, the liquidity over a year because, you know, incentive campaigns come and go, liquidity comes up and goes down. But ultimately, there's, you know, a few ecosystems where there's concentrated user bases where people go and they've managed to build, you know, an ecosystem of real use cases. And that's not going away. If anything, we'll probably see more chains, and there'll always be a reason to launch a new chain. And I do believe that, you know, apps might launch their own chains. But at the end of the day, who will win? I mean, a Robinhood launching their own chain means, well, they have the users, they have distribution. You have Kraken, Coinbase, Binance have all their own networks. So at the end of the day, it will be driven by who has users, who has distribution.
And the mainstream players are coming now.
Exactly. So I think there's a short time window where, you know, existing chains can specialize and find their niche and like kind of, you know, get a market share before they get outcompeted with commoditized infrastructure, you know, these newer, bigger players coming in and just saying, okay, I'm just going to launch this. Why do I need you to provide me with chain infrastructure? It's commoditized. I'm going to run it myself. And so from our perspective, right, we have an advantage as well because Bitcoin is hard. Not many people work with it. It's slow. It's painful. And there's a lot of engineering effort right now. This is going to change in the next couple of years, just like Ethereum fraud proofs and ZK proofs were very new, and now it's being commoditized. Bitcoin's the biggest market. It's very, very hard. It's harder to do than on Ethereum because you just have very limited tools. But it's going to face the same dilemma, I think, as we see with many ecosystems right now. Either you specialize, and then you win the market there, and then you can start expanding, or a Robinhood is going to come and just eat your lunch.
It's always humbling to compare the total market cap of all of crypto to the amount of cash in Apple, and imagine what it's like for some of those big players to come in.
I just wanted to just add a couple of points to his thoughts. Liquidity fragmentation actually is kind of a necessary evil because if we are staring at a world where each of the apps are going to be building their own L2s or app-specific chains, those players are going to choose whether they are going to build deep liquidity or they're going to just solve for the specific use case, right? For example, a gaming app chain, they don't need to have deep liquidity in BTC or ETH, while a DeFi-specific chain or a trading perp-specific protocol might need to have deep liquidity across some of the blue chip assets. So it's a necessary evil, but obviously at the end of the day, the core application that is supporting the chain will kind of choose what they want. But at the end of the day, it is the use case that really matters for the chain, is what I wanted to.
Alex, do you want to add to that?
No, I think it's well covered.
Perfect. Okay, well, maybe we'll send this one to either Amit, Alexei. A question about kind of Bitcoin joining DeFi. It's been so long talked about. It's starting to actually happen. Is Bitcoin actually changing DeFi as it comes into the ecosystem, or is it just reinventing a lot of what Ethereum's already done?
I think I would say Ethereum really started DeFi, because like that's where the real DeFi summer kind of started. Bitcoin has a different appeal as a store of value or as a replacement for gold, etc. It has carved its like the king of crypto kind of basically the image in the people's minds. But now obviously DeFi on Bitcoin is great. Like a lot of Bitcoiners are borrowing the principles of DeFi that was built on Ethereum, and it's a great thing because unlocking a $2 to $3 trillion asset class and building DeFi applications on top of it is probably going to grow beyond what has been built on Ethereum with a lot more innovations, I would say. Yeah.
But I guess I'm just curious, what innovation specifically, other than bringing this gold-like asset class to DeFi, like what specific DeFi innovations has bringing Bitcoin into the game unlocked?
I think that's not necessarily the way to see it, right? I mean, DeFi primitives exist on Ethereum. It's very well developed, and Ethereum remains the DeFi innovation hub. Bitcoin is different, right? If you just zoom out, if we step beyond this event, this conference, crypto equals to Bitcoin for 90% plus of the global population, right? People know Bitcoin, they know Ethereum, and then it gets really, really tricky. So unlocking Bitcoin DeFi, allowing people who are now buying Bitcoin en masse because suddenly it's mainstream, right? The central banks who a few years ago were saying Bitcoin's bad for the environment, we should ban it, we should stop it, they're now selling it to my grandparents, right? There's this complete shift of narrative, and that means it's mainstream. There's more users coming in, users who have never heard of DeFi. So what Bitcoin allows us and forces us to do is it allows us to onboard millions of new users into the space, but they don't know DeFi. It forces us to get closer to Web2-like experience, to closer to what neobanks have achieved. And I think that's how Bitcoin is probably going to change DeFi, not on the primitives, but how we interact with it, abstracting it further and simplifying it, because at the end of the day, that's what really grows the pie. And instead of, fighting for the same DeFi users, of course, you're always going to have new degens and more power users come in. But if you think of like crossing the chasm, right, we're kind of entering the phase where the late adopters are coming in. That's the Bitcoiners. And so the impact that Bitcoin is having on DeFi, again, isn't about, what can we build on Bitcoin that we can't build on Ethereum? The question is rather, how many more users can we get into the space on-chain before the institutions consolidate and all the Bitcoin, all the liquidity gets sucked into central banks and the ETFs? And from our perspective, if you ask me what's our goal, what's the dream for Bob in 5 to 10 years, well, the dream is that there's more Bitcoin in DeFi, whether on our chain or other ecosystems, than in the ETFs. Because if I have to go to my bank in 10 years and ask them, can I send my Bitcoin to my friend? It's not Bitcoin anymore and we failed.
Yeah, to add to this, I also believe that if we can unlock Bitcoin more on-chain, essentially, make it more available within DeFi, and can put it, I can use it as a collateral to then engage in DeFi. I think it's just a huge capital influx for DeFi as such, because there's so many people that have been onboarded to crypto via Bitcoin. They don't want to touch it, and they can't really, they don't want to change their portfolio essentially. but they would love to take some risks and be active. I think putting that money into work, that's a big opportunity.
And I agree with everything here. Just from the technical perspective, I think the future of Bitcoin DeFi is Ethereum. Just looking into the feasibility of scaling DeFi on Bitcoin itself, settling on Bitcoin, it does not look anywhere near. Like we can have more trustlessness with Bitcoin on Ethereum than on Bitcoin itself. Just with collateralized solutions, with some consensus, ZK proving. So like this is what I think is going to happen, and it's happening now with WBTC, CBBTC, TBTC on Ethereum, and it's just going to accelerate.
Ethereumifying Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I have to disagree with some aspects. Execution environment, primitives, definitely. But one thing that we never had on Bitcoin before, and you're absolutely right, up until this point, it was always wrapping with centralized providers, maybe bigger multisigs, going to Ethereum. But with the new taproot upgrades that we had, we finally have the blueprint to create native Bitcoin. We can create rollups because we finally found a way basically to hack fraud proofs into Bitcoin with BitVM. And if you look at, yes, it's still not perfect, but the speed of iteration from August, when the BitVM 2 paper came out, the first time when we know how to build it, to testnets and now really operators starting to run it, I think, Bitcoin speed running the Ethereum rollup process. So we will see Bitcoin native rollups. We will see native Bitcoin on these systems. And of course, that's a much stronger value proposition than wrapping it through centralized providers.
100%. Yeah, I agree. And I want to be optimistic. I want to believe that this is going to happen. So far, what I've seen requires trust assumptions. Like even if you use BitVM, you're willing to get into optimistic assumptions of one of n users. You cannot do that. You're like one of n operators. More.
But it's not too far from how Ethereum rollups work today in practice.
In practice, I think it's relatively far. I would say it's relatively far, especially with ZK rollups. Like ZK rollups don't give you any trust assumptions on the security side, at least. So on the governance, it's a different topic, but you still have stage 2 rollups. So I want to believe. I really hope that Bitcoin embraces more modern mindset and integrates, makes upgrades that make directly ZK verification possible, that make spending of assets possible trustlessly, that users can withdraw trustlessly. Hopefully this will happen in a couple of years. I just have not seen it so far.
I just want to add one point, right? Like DeFi Summer was built on Ethereum, which was probably a $100 billion asset back in late 20s. And now if a $2.2 trillion asset, DeFi is being built on top of that, I think the number of innovations and the number of different types of protocols that will add to the complexity of innovation is going to grow immensely. Not to kind of say that like the DeFi on Ethereum will stop innovating, but I would say there's a lot more scope for innovation if DeFi protocols kind of proliferate on Bitcoin.
So within cross-chain, if we all agree that we're careening toward this future where the user doesn't know which chain they're using, all the liquidity seamlessly moves over, who end up as the winners and losers in that? If everything's fully seamless, who does that benefit and who loses out?
Well, obviously, users and applications are the biggest winners because they get as infrastructure improves. Who are the biggest winners of mobile phones or internet or whatever? It's everyone. If you're asking about the protocol layers, then I think that's an interesting question. Definitely protocol networks on the one hand that connect, that enable this interop solutions. I think everyone in DeFi in general, because liquidity becomes much more abundant. Like banks benefit from fast settlement, from going from several days to like minutes. Similarly, all DeFi protocols have benefit from better access to liquidity. More thoughts?
I need to ask you back. Were you asking for winners or were you asking for who benefits?
I guess I'm curious. It seems to me like there are so many people that benefit, the users benefit, the protocols benefit. It's almost mind-boggling why we don't already have seamless cross-chain DeFi. And it seems to me, and I'm curious what you guys would think of this, that there is some question of who should be building that. Is it the foundations? Is it networks? Is it protocols?
It can't be the foundation. There's so many conflict of interest, right? I think to a large extent, interoperability is solved. What's missing is enough abstraction, and there are just too many incentives to keep it fragmented. There are too many incentives to not standardize because everyone is trying to push their own standards. So ultimately, the strongest will win.
So what's happening? So the thing that's actually blocking this from happening is every single project trying to get their own standards adopted rather than agreeing on a common set of standards.
Very good example. Sorry, a very good example around this is the topic around multi-chain standards. So Layer 0 has OFTs, wormhole entities, Axler, ITS, Chainlink, CTTs. XRC20 is around. So this is now a fight on who finds the most adoption. And until then, we will have to suffer from fragmentation. And that's just like a battle. It's just like literal market dynamics to sit out. It's just time. It's not a matter of tech. It's a matter of time.
I will disagree politely that it is a solved problem. I think that it's solved for a very specific set of use cases and a relatively narrow set of use cases. So you can interoperate with, you can transfer highly liquid tokens between highly liquid ecosystems with some, without additional severe trust and capital assumptions.
I disagree. That's true for liquidity networks. Multi-chain standards allow us to simply arbitrarily mint and burn assets, so it doesn't matter if small or big. And then from there on top of that, we have intense systems, so we don't even have to ask the question anymore, which solution to lose. Like intense systems already answer the question of tool fragmentation. Tool fragmentation for today's DeFi power use is a problem. And with CowSwap, 1inch Fusion, UniX, we had like same chain swaps now across Mayan. Everyone and their mother is launching intense systems for bridging, and then the next generation is generalized and abstracted. And the only missing piece is zapping, essentially, so that you can combine arbitrary swapping, bridging transactions and interacting with any smart contract.
So
that's solved.
With minting and burning, what additional trust assumptions do you add in addition to trusting the chains on which it happens?
It really depends on the standard. It depends on it really depends on which standard you're choosing, and all these underlying messaging bridges have their own trust assumptions.
Yeah, so what fundamentally, if I want to move $1 billion, imagine you have $1 billion natively issued on one chain and you're moving it on a different chain, and now it's kind of like fully depends on the trust assumptions of this bridge. So
trustless bridging is impossible. I mean,
well, it is if you build it natively into protocol.
The only way to do trustless bridging is ultimately, if you map it out in theory, ends up you build one chain, right? You want one chain to verify the other, but you'll always have to, of course, you have to trust two chains.
Correct. So if chains both settle on Ethereum, then you can do this.
Exactly, or they settle on Bitcoin, right? And then everybody agrees that we trust this one thing, but you end up, and we've seen this vision over and over again with Polkadot, Cosmos, Ethereum's rollup vision. But the one thing that when I would disagree that interoperability is solved, not because it's bad and we haven't solved the problem, but because it never will be solved. You have to trade off speed and atomicity, right? It doesn't work. You can't have atomic cross-chain transactions across all the chains.
Yes.
Sorry, it's trade-off between trust and atomicity and speed, right? If you want to go fast, you'll trust. If you want to go really, really secure, you'll have to wait until each chain verifies each other. And cross-chain like-line bridges exist in very, very rare cases, usually with still trust assumptions like multisigs on top, because I mean, look at it. Polkadot tried to build a trustless like-line bridge to Ethereum. It still has a multisig in there because Ethereum does not have a secure like-line at this point.
I agree. It's solved by being abstracted away. So it's just being kept away from the user. The user doesn't even make the choice anymore. It's just trusting a network of third parties. Funds are locked. Proof is given that I got what I want, and everything else other people can take the risk. So the risk is being taken away from the user. That's what I would say.
I fully agree with what you said. But this has profound implications, and I think this is what the Ethereum's counter take, like this contrarian take of Ethereum, if you want, versus the rest of the world, is that you can have it within the bounds of what Vitalik calls a single security zone. So, like let's say Ethereum and all Ethereum rollups can be one security zone. Bitcoin and Bitcoin rollups, if we come to this trustless ecosystem, is another security zone. Polkadot is a third security zone. So within the zone, it's feasible. We can have fully trustless interoperability. Now, to make it also fast and convenient, you probably need to bake it into the protocols, like what we're trying to do with ZKsync, what some other ecosystems on Ethereum are trying to do. But between the security zones, you fundamentally cannot overcome the subjective forking choice problem. So you will always have a lot of trust assumptions, and this is why I think Ethereum's bet is everything should be built on Ethereum, and it's obviously conflicting with other ecosystems, so we'll see how this plays out.
One interesting, you're absolutely right, with one thing to add, right? Verifying efficient between Ethereum ecosystem and Solana is very hard because these systems are not meant to be easy to verify. They're meant to be powerful in execution, but Bitcoin is easy to verify. Every smart contract chain can verify Bitcoin. In the Litecoin or ZK proof, you can always check that Bitcoin is secure. And you can check that any Bitcoin L2 has securely settled on Bitcoin. So there is this one exception where Ethereum rollups and Ethereum itself can verify Bitcoin, and they can maintain trust minimized bridges. Now, where it gets messy is that the bridges then still
it's
have
one
to
way
build
because you cannot send messages.
And if you want to be directional, well, then you still need to verify Ethereum, and that's where things kind of get difficult.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap. I'm getting the signal too. It's a really interesting conversation. Is everything all part of one pool, or are there these different zones? And I think we'll have to see how it all plays out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.